Hello, I am Ellen Steger, President of the League of Women Voters of Richardson. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that never supports or opposes any candidate or political party. If you are interested in joining or donating to the League of Women Voters of Richardson, visit our website, LWV-Richardson.org. Membership is open to women and men of all ages. This forum is sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Richardson for candidates running for City of Richardson City Council Place 4. All registered voters living in Richardson, whether in Dallas County or in Collin County, may vote in this election. There is a geographical requirement that the candidates must live within Place 4. This forum was recorded via Zoom during the first week in April without an audience. More voter information may be found online at vote411.org and our website, LWV-Richardson.org. Printed voters guides are now available. See our website for locations. Before we begin, I need to review the format for this forum. Both candidates have agreed to abide by some basic ground rules, and as moderator, I have agreed to ensure that the ground rules are followed. The candidates will discuss their own opinions, their own positions or on issues and not dwell on the opponent's position or record. Refrain from personal attacks or charges. Will answer the question that was asked and will respect the time limits. The candidates will have 1.5 minutes to introduce themselves, 1.5 minutes to answer each question, and 2 minutes for a closing statement. Candidates will rotate going first. The public was polled to supply questions for this forum. Requests were made on social media and on the Richardson League's website, as well as through emails. Many thanks to those who submitted questions. However, due to the number of questions submitted and the time limitations of this forum, we are not able to ask all questions submitted. Questions have been screened according to the League of Women Voters of Texas Guide to Candidates Forums. The candidates have no prior knowledge of these questions. The timekeeper for the evening is from the League of Women Voters of Richardson and will be visible on the video at all times. The timekeeper will signal with a green sign when 30 seconds remain, with a yellow sign when 10 seconds remain, and with a red stop sign when time for answering the question has expired. Candidates, can both of you see the timekeeper?
Yes.
The candidates have 1.5 minutes to introduce themselves. Introductions will be in ballot order. Kyle Kepner is currently council member in Place 4. Mr. Kepner, as you are in ballot position 1, you have 1.5 minutes to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ellen. Like she said, my name is Kyle Kepner. I'm a lifelong resident in Richardson, born and raised 50 years. I lived in Duck Creek and in Northridge and then Canyon Creek. And I live across the alley from my mother, so I jokingly say I haven't gotten real far in life. But I also own a business here, so I understand the struggles of property taxes on homeowners, property taxes on business owners, and what it is like to grow up in a wonderful town like Richardson. And I'm thrilled to be here. I can't imagine living anywhere else. I've been on council for 2 years. I have a strong record of voting for the citizens. When developers come to me, I start with a no, and they have to earn a yes. And when we have citizens speaking out against developments, I take their needs and wants first when making decisions. I have a lovely wife. I've been married for 15 years to my wife, Jazz. I have 2 children, Cole and Kendall. They are 14 and 11. They go to Plano schools because I live in the Collin County portion of Richardson. And I'm the only council person that has kids in Plano schools, which is a differentiating factor between my opponent and I. And I'm just glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Joe Corcoran, you have 1.5 minutes for an introduction.
Thank you. My name is Joe Corcoran, and I am running for Richardson City Council in Place 4 to be your voice and be your advocate. I want to start by thanking the League of Women Voters for hosting us here today in putting this forum on. I've watched every prior League of Women Voters debate or forum available, and I know the questions you guys will ask are going to be timely, relevant, and to the point. I'm a former Apollo Panther and a former Burton Ram. I obtained 2 master's degrees in business from Texas Tech while working full-time. I've been in corporate compliance my entire career, both as a leader and individual contributor, designing and implementing audits. I know the value of hard work and the importance of a fair, unbiased, and ethical, transparent government. I have experience in asking tough questions and holding people accountable to their answers. I also have an extensive resume volunteering in grant-making organizations and on the ground, including with United Way and the Communities Foundation of Texas. In grant-making, what we do is we essentially look at how to spend other people's money, their donations in this case, to achieve the greatest long-term impact on the community. I want to put that skill set to work for you as we develop Richardson along the path of long-term financial stability and operational viability. I believe that I am the best candidate up here to achieve those goals, and I hope to prove that to you today and to earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now start the questions. Each of you has 1.5 minutes to answer each question. And Mr. Corcoran, you will start with question number 1. What do you see as Richardson's biggest strength? How should Richardson leverage it?
Absolutely. Hey, thank you. I think our biggest strength is in our neighborhoods. I have made it a point to campaign constantly on the ground to all the different neighborhoods here. I've met with a lot of our neighborhood organizations, our HOAs and our neighborhood associations, and the events and the hard work that these volunteers put on is just absolutely incredible. They give 20, 30 hours of their time every week to really get people together. And I would love to see the city I'd love to see the city take that and again, leverage it by creating new programs and facilitating ways for these neighborhood associations to do things like park cleanups, street walks, increase walkability in our neighborhoods, increase bikeability, and enhance our pedestrian culture. Working with the neighborhoods is going to be so critical to all of our operational goals in the future. And I would love the city to really leverage our neighborhoods to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Kepner, you have 1.5 minutes.
So undoubtedly the greatest strength of Richardson is our people. We have lived through a difficult year, and it started before COVID. It started with the tornado in October. And I was in the affected area that morning. Got in a little trouble for doing so without asking permission, but I kind of snuck in that neighborhood to see if I could lend a hand, moving brush, helping people. And I was just amazed at the camaraderie and the neighborly feeling I got in that neighborhood when people were out digging other people out of homes and moving stuff off of cars and clearing the street. And it was overwhelming emotionally. It was an unbelievable experience. And then you went on the days and weeks after, and it never stopped. People were having meals for their neighbors out in their front yard, and organizations all over the city were over there helping, and from around the state. I worked at Network during that time, handed out food, and it was amazing the eagerness for people to volunteer in this city. So, that is out of tragedy, we saw pure greatness in our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, Mr. Kepner, you will begin. What should Richardson do, if anything, to support local businesses impacted by the pandemic? And please elaborate.
Well, so I'm a small business owner, and there were a lot of plans out there that were out and available for small business. And our city management did a great job, specifically Don Magner, put together our website and had all the access to all the federal and county options. In fact, Richardson also did their own. Typically, the CARES money went to the larger metropolitan areas and the counties, and then we had to work on getting funds for our city to disperse as well. We did things like waive fees. We waived, we had several $1 million that we were able to give out to local residents in both Collin and in Dallas County. we have an interesting problem, and not a problem. We're in an interesting situation where we're in 2 counties, and we have to work with both counties to make things work for everybody. And it's we're one of the few cities that deals with something like that. But I think we do it really well. We work with the judges and the county commissioners in both cities to make sure that our residents, no matter where they live in the city, have the resources that they need. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Corcoran, you have a minute and a half.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, when COVID hit, I jumped into action. I put together a spreadsheet of all the businesses that were staying open and circulated it to all the various neighborhood groups on Facebook. It got picked up by Community Impact, and I really made an effort to push that out there so that we knew which businesses were open. And I think that the city did have a decent response to the small business, the issues affecting small businesses due to COVID. But going forward, I would love to see the city draft an emergency small business plan in case any sort of disaster, whether it's pandemic related, weather related, whatever happens again that forces our businesses to shut down. I don't want our business owners to be scared in the future that they're going to be run out of their lease, or that they're going to be behind on payments, or that they can't pay their staff. And I think the city having a plan for how we'll allocate our staff to respond and how we'll allocate our resources is very important to reassure our business owners that they'll be taken care of in the future as well.
Thank you. Mr. Corcoran, you begin the next question. Cities throughout the region have different community standards concerning code enforcement. Do you believe that Richardson is too lenient, too strict, or doing things right in regards to code enforcement? And please explain.
Hey, thanks for the question. So I've talked to hundreds of residents, and it seems like you either have someone who thinks that code enforcement is way too lenient, or you have people that think it's way too strict, and it's a very specific situation with each individual. I think what's important is to have a city councilman who listens to those concerns and then finds ways to finds patterns, right? Takes them back to city staff and follows up. And so while I think our code enforcement is just right for now, improvement can always be had, right? And I think that whether it's following up with the individual, or whether it's following up with the code enforcement officer, or whatever happened, each specific instance is a learning opportunity. And it may not be an issue with the individual. Maybe it's an issue with the code itself, right? Even if code enforcement is great, there's always room to improve the code itself. And so if I were on city council, I would always I look at procedural documents all the time, right? In my day job and in grant making. So looking at how to amend the code if we see long-term patterns with code enforcement issues, good or bad, is something I would love to do. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Kepner, you have a minute and a half.
Thank you. I love this question. Code enforcement is strict in Richardson, and it's great that we do that. I was recently driving in a neighboring city with my son, and who's 14, and he goes, "Are we still in Richardson? This doesn't look like Richardson." And I said, "No, we're not in Richardson, and you can tell because of code enforcement. We have a beautiful city, and we hold our people up to standards, or a certain standard that we have set." Now, one thing I love about code enforcement is you might get that letter. I think we all have. I've gotten a letter for an overhanging tree or something like that. But however, code enforcement's main priority is get the issue fixed and not to fine our citizens. We have a mentality in that department to make sure that if it's a matter of a fine or having that money used to remedy the situation, we will choose remedy the situation every single time. And it's these people are out. I run into them all the time on the streets, and I always thank them because they are out there driving every day, out there 6 days, 7 days a week sometimes, making sure that our neighbors are respecting each other and keeping their houses and apartment buildings and corporate buildings in check. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kepner, you will answer first on the next question. The city does not currently take any federal dollars through community development block grants, leaving a lot of money on the table. Do you believe the city should pursue these grants? Yes or no, and why?
I do not believe we should pursue the grants, and we have a history of not doing that. Oftentimes, these block grants or federal programs come with strings attached, and they become with burdensome regulations. And we, as was noted yesterday, we have a AAA bond rating from the two major bond raters, and we take care of our city. We don't need the federal government to do different things and have them have us follow the federal regulations to do so, such as, you know, housing departments and stuff like that. You have to hire people. There's a cost involved in all that. And then so we've decided in the city, not me personally, but in the past and continue to do so, that Richardson's going to stand on its own and take care of its own people without the federal government being involved in our day-to-day life. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Corcoran, you have a minute and a half.
Hey, thank you. So, yeah, budget flexibility is incredibly important. And the more grants that you take from the federal sources or state sources, the more strings are attached to them. But it doesn't stop there, right? The other side of that coin is if you're not going to take those grants, you have to find ways to get that revenue from somewhere else. And that's where having a long-term vision on council is just incredibly important. Having ideas and always coming to the table with new ideas for things like parcels of land, all the way to how we design our entire city is important. You know, we have to find ways to, again, redevelop and revitalize our commercial areas so that we can find other ways to get that revenue. We have to find ways to increase housing density. That doesn't necessarily mean apartments, right? That means encouraging things like townhomes, MDUs, duplexes, ways to, again, get more revenue into our city to offset the money we don't get from those federal block grants. I think that's the important thing, and that's a skill set you want on council, not just to say yes or no because of the regulations, but then what's the alternative? How do we work towards that alternative to make up for the revenue that we're passing on?
Thank you. And Mr. Corcoran, you will answer first on this next question. Much has been discussed about affordable housing in our region. What role do you believe the city should play in ensuring the availability of affordable housing to all income levels? You have a minute and a half.
Well, that's fortuitous because that kind of just plays right into the answer I just gave. You know, I think that the city, there's a lot of things that we can do to increase our housing stock in Richardson. Apartments are, of course, they're part of the mix, but they're not the entire mix. And that goes into what I just mentioned. We need things like townhomes, small homes, accessory dwelling units, and duplexes, and maybe even fourplexes if they work with the neighborhood to ensure that we have a housing stock, because everybody who works in Richardson should be able to live in Richardson. Whether you're a mechanic or a CEO or a young professional like myself, you should have that option. And that's something that I would, you know, I wish I had seen council really push and act on in the past. But if I were elected to council, those are priorities that I'd like to implement from day one, because they should have been pushed years ago. We're at a point where we need the revenue, and where our single housing family model doesn't sustain the revenue, doesn't produce enough revenue to sustain the roads in our city, right? And so these are things that we need to push, not just for the residents, but for the long-term viability of Richardson's finances.
Thank you. And Mr. Kepner, you have a minute and a half.
So rising home prices, rising apartment prices are a regional issue here in Texas. We have a influx of people coming into the state because our economy is strong, and our housing prices, even though they may seem to be rising to us, are relatively inexpensive compared to the rest of the country. I'm all for having townhomes, duplexes, small homes. In fact, when we spent the multitude of hours on the IQ, we designated areas in the IQ to allow for tiny home village or townhomes or fourplexes and duplexes. Apartments, not really the answer, because most of the apartments in the area are luxury apartments, and they're not really affordable per se. I'm a big fan of allowing in certain lots and certain types of situations, ADUs and allowing someone to have an income property on their lot. It's not something that's really come before us, but I'm all for it and open to that. You know, we create policy in effect by doing goal setting, and then the city goes ahead and presents us options, and that's how it works. And these items have been brought into the city management, and we're already underway with those. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kepner, may I say that toward the end of that, your sound was getting a little bit lower. So make sure
Okay.
you're talking right into the microphone.
Sure.
And you start next on this next question.
Okay.
The Richardson ISD recently changed from election system where all 7 trustees were elected at large to a system where only 2 trustees are elected at large. The remaining 5 trustees are now elected in single-member districts. Do you believe the city should change to a similar system where at least some of the city council members are elected in single-member districts? Please elaborate. You have a minute.
So I think the way we have our system is set up really well. The fact of the matter is, when you have single districts, those council people represent the people in their district, and that's their main priority. The way it is set up now is we represent everyone in Richardson, and I think that's the way it should be. We have 4 places that have a residency requirement solely to make sure that we have people represented from the 4 quadrants of the city. But when I don't want to have to just represent my neighborhood and my adjacent neighborhoods and just fight for them, I want to be able to fight for everyone in the city and I enjoy getting phone calls from people in all 4 places and fixing things or helping them with their situations. And it also adds to cohesiveness with us the way we have our system set up, because we're all beholden to every single voter. And I think that's the way it should be. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Corcoran, you have a minute and a half.
Hey, thank you. So, you know, I understand the goal that people who want single member districts are trying to achieve. And I do think that it would increase the chance of having maybe minority or more diverse representation on city council. But I'm not in favor of it, because you look at the flip side, right? Look at the place we're running in place 4. Of all the precincts, 4 of those precincts are Canyon Creek, and the other 2 are like Greenwood Hills, Northridge, and Mark Twain. And someone could effectively just campaign in Canyon Creek and ignore the other 3 neighborhoods and potentially win the spot, right? And we don't want that kind of a situation, because then you essentially ignore, a portion of your district. In this situation, you have to campaign everywhere, right? And you have to get everybody's votes. I will say that as a city, we need to take a look at our election methods and how we do our places and have a really good justification for why written out. Because I guarantee you, it may not be in 5 years, it may not be in 10 years, but someone is going to sue us at some point. And we better have a good justification backed up by data for why our method works. I don't want to end up wasting taxpayers' money fighting a lawsuit we'll ultimately lose because we weren't prepared.
Thank you. And Mr. Corcoran, you will begin with the next question. What role should local city council members take in trying to influence state legislation? Please elaborate.
Well, I think it's really important for us to have good relationships with our state representatives. But at the same time, it would be kind of hypocritical for me to go around and harp on all the restrictions the state government is trying to place on cities, and then go and try to influence what happens in Austin, right? Especially if it doesn't revolve around municipalities. So, if what happens in Austin impacts Richardson and impacts Richardson's government's ability to function, obviously I'm a city councilman. I'm going to be a voice on that. But anything outside of that, that's not my place, just as much as I don't expect the state government to weigh in on local elections or weigh in on the way our local government operates.
Thank you. And Mr. Kepner, you have a minute and a half.
Currently, we operate as a team on this. We have our city manager and the mayor basically handle any policy issues with our elected officials at the statewide and national level. we all have relationships with them, and we see them out at events, and we can pick up the phone and call them if we have a concern. But we try not to have 7 different people calling one representative and having 7 different complaints. We try to have a unified message with them and allow one person, the mayor, to handle these situations.
Thank you. And Mr. Kepner, you will go first on this next question. What suggestions do you have for engaging more citizens in local government and including those groups that have not previously been involved? You have a minute and a half.
Well, we pretty much have good involvement from all the city. We really encourage people to sign up for boards and commissions. Now, there is a long list of people that are on that list that have tried to get on a board. We don't have a ton of boards and commissions to be more civically involved, unfortunately. But this year we kind of took a different tack. We actually interviewed about 25 people, and we try to do a diverse slate and from people all over the city. And I think, as you can see from our last meeting where we had our board members be announced, we have people from different parts of the city that weren't traditionally included in boards and commissions, and we take that really seriously. We would love to have 500 people sign up to be involved. There's other ways for them. We also encourage people to join the Citizens Police Academy, which I'm actually doing in May. We have the Citizens Fire Academy. We have Leadership Richardson, and all those in their charter are looking for people in all different areas of Dallas, or all different areas of Richardson, and all different walks of life. And they are trying to have a really diverse group of people involved in all those programs. And I think that's great.
Thank you. Mr. Corcoran, minute and a half.
Sure. I beg to differ. I've made it a point to campaign to a lot of our diverse communities here in Richardson. And while a lot of them are satisfied with city services and satisfied with the way the city is run, they don't feel as engaged as they could be. And especially with a lot of cultural sensitivities, they feel like those things aren't always being met. And it's not always the city's fault, but it's something that as a city councilman and a leader in the community, I have a duty to try to find a solution to. I also think that once being elected, constant engagement with all of our communities is important. I've made it a point in my campaign to visit a lot of different places of worship, and especially our various mosques here in town. And after visiting one recently, I went there, I gave my spiel, I asked people if they had any questions. I got a couple, and then I sat back down, and a lady came up to me afterwards and she said, "Joe, you're handling this wrong." She said, "You're going and asking them for questions about you. You should be asking us questions about our problems." And I thought that was very poignant, and it stuck with me. Outreach is important. Constantly showing up is important. And I think that constant follow-up and outreach to all of our different communities is what's going to get them involved in the long run. And that's what I pledge to do.
Thank you. Mr. Corcoran, you will go first on this next question. Of the possible options for the fate of the Civic Center, which option do you support and why?
Hey, thank you. So whatever the options that are there, I know that they've changed around a couple times. I think that the big sticking point there is, what do we do with the big meeting halls and the big meeting spaces? And at this point, I think that when we started leasing out those rooms in the Civic Center to groups around town, or started renting them out, for meetings and things like that, we didn't have the private industry. We didn't have the big multi-use hotels, right? The full service hotels to absorb that convention capacity. Now we do in Richardson. And I think it's a great way to save money by converting like the Grand Hall, right, to offices, and letting private business take on that capacity. Let's get government out of that.
Thank you. And Mr. Kepner, you have a minute and a half.
That's easy. City Hall needs to be out of the Civic Center business. We have lots of hotels. We have meeting venues. We have restaurants that have meeting space. And when we are doing things at City Hall, we are competing for that same business. And quite frankly, we haven't raised our rates in 20 years, and we undercut all the private business out there. We operated at a loss last year of almost $650,000 on the Civic Center. Now, we don't need to be making money on the Civic Center, but if we're going to operate something, we certainly don't need to be operating at a loss like that. I think we've decided pretty much, nothing's finalized, but that area is going to be converted to offices. City Hall, if you take a look in the behind the curtain, we have people working in closets. We have files stacked on top of file cabinets to the ceiling. This building was meant for a population of 60,000 and not 120,000. So these people that work in the city and the offices desperately need more space. And the Grand Hall is a great place for that. When we are going to keep the other meeting spaces for small meetings, but as of right now, it looks like we're going to be out of the big, larger convention space for sure.
Thank you. Mr. Kettner, you'll go first at this next question. What budget items would you change? Why? And what effect would these changes have? You have a minute and a half.
So we have an incredible finance team. And we just got our bond rating yesterday. We have strong fiscal responsibility here in Richardson. We have to look at each thing on a line-to-line basis. We start with a zero-based budget every year. We have to be mindful of the money that is being spent because it's not our money, it's our residents' money. Whatever we do, we want to make sure that we are meeting the safety needs of our citizens first, and the having clean parks and having all the services that we can provide, and making people happy that they live in a great city and they're being well taken care of in the services that we provide. I don't see anything on the budget that needs to be totally changed. Obviously, there's adjustments every year. One thing we're going to have to look at is our hotel motel fund has really been decimated due to COVID, and we fund some things like the arts and things like that. So we're going to have to be creative so we can continue doing so with a budget that's been decimated. Thank you.
And Mr. Corcoran, you have a minute and a half.
Well, I think that City Council should be setting priorities for city staff, obviously working with them in those priorities, but not just taking the budget as presented and asking questions. And so, I made it a point, again, whenever I decided to run, to look at all the budgets side by side, look at all the line items, and see, hey, like, what would I change, right? Or what would I think we should experiment with? And something that we know we have an issue with in Richardson is our infrastructure. We know it's a priority for us. And so something I'd really love to do is look at the line item for concrete repairs in our streets budget and our parks budget, right? That has hovered for the past 5 years between $200,000 and $250,000. And our asphalt line item is $140,000, I think, for this past year. And so I think something that we could do is really start experimenting on a small scale with that concrete budget to move some of that money over from asphalt, or as we redevelop, or as our as we recover from the pandemic-induced recession, look at our line items and find ways to feed that concrete line item budget so that we can do more concrete repairs and increase our streets long-term useful life, right? And move away from asphalt. I think looking at specific things like that and empowering our city staff to experiment is absolutely critical moving forward for our long-term vision.
Thank you. This is the last question, and Mr. Corcoran, you will be going first. A lot of talk centers around privatizing certain city functions that supposedly could be done better in the private sector. Is there any function that you would consider privatizing that could possibly be accomplished more effectively in the private sector? Please explain.
I think that there's something really magical about having publicly owned things, right? Things that the whole city, all of us as citizenry, own and work towards operating together. So I would hate to privatize our streets or privatize our parks or rec centers. I mean, I think we already mentioned that with the Civic Center, that one thing we could outsource is our room rental. I mean, we could let private industry take that on. I think there may be maybe some small services like that that we could outsource. But at the grand scheme of things, a lot of stuff that we have is public for a reason. And I really think that that's why our city is doing all of this economic redevelopment, right? So that we can pay for all the wonderful things that the city has. As I go around everywhere, I do hear people say they love our city services. And I don't think there's a reason or a need to outsource those to a private industry. I think what we need to do is come to the table with a long-term vision for how we're going to pay for all of those. And that's what I've been doing since day one, is coming to the table, coming to the campaign trail with a long-term vision on redevelopment, on how to operate our city and do things with bike lanes and walkability to make sure that we do have the money in the long run to pay for everything.
Thank you. And Mr. Kepner, you have a minute and a half.
So the only thing I've ever heard people ask about privatizing is our trash service. And I have to tell you, if you've lived in a surrounding town of Richardson, we have the best trash service. No one else has twice a week trash. No one else has once a week Babbitt. You know, you might not be a fan of the bags. You might rather have bins, but there's a huge cost to converting to that, let alone the fact that we have a lot of 8-foot wide alleys, and we have a lot of alleys that have overhead power lines. Yeah, I'm against privatizing any of that stuff. You know, when you privatize stuff, you let go of your quality control. You know, you're letting someone else handle quality. And right now, the services that we offer are top notch, and we need to continue offering them at that level.
Thank you. That was the last question. Thank you very much. This has been very informative.
Thank you.
Closing statements will be given in reverse ballot order. Each candidate will now have 2 minutes for a closing statement. And Mr. Cochran, we will start with you. You have 2 minutes.
The classic Italian novel, The Leopard, deals with rural Sicily during a time of unprecedented growth in Italy. The main character, an Italian nobleman, ultimately chooses to embrace the future, stating that everything must change so that everything can remain the same. We're in a period now where we must redevelop and revitalize our commercial centers so we can sustain all of the wonderful public places and services that have made Richardson a city worth calling home for so many decades. Change is inevitable, but it doesn't have to be inequitable. To obtain the kind of responsible growth that serves all of our current residents, you need a city councilman that brings forward-thinking ideas and a long-term vision for our city to the table. Anybody watching this can sit on the dais and vote yes or no based on staff recommendations, petitions, and citizen comments. That doesn't really take skill. I want to be the councilman that solves the problem before it gets to the hearing. And I believe that my history in corporate compliance and my volunteer work have given me the skill set to do just that. I'm not running for this office to score political points or to build a resume. I'm running to represent the people of Richardson, the same people that I went to school with in my youth and have now been my constant companions as I've campaigned the past 4 months. Win or lose, it's their stories and their aspirations that will serve as my North Star in the years ahead. My cell phone number is 210-260-8331, and my email is joe@joeforrichardson.com. Please tell me your story so that we can move forward together. If what I have shared today resonates with you, I humbly request your support and your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Kepner, 2 minutes for a closing.
Thank you. So I often get asked if I enjoy being on city council, and there are things to enjoy absolutely about being on the council, but it's not really a question about enjoyment for me. It's about fulfillment and serving my neighbor. I was sitting on the phone yesterday with a PISD board member, and we were talking about our favorite things about being in service to our cities. And I said that my favorite part is getting phone calls and emails and helping people solve their issues. I get them all the time. I go to that person's house or their business, and I make sure that I am involved from the beginning to the end on making sure these things are rectified. And there are countless people that I've done this for. I have a servant's heart. I've lived here my whole life. I've served for 2 years faithfully, and would love to serve more. And that's about it. I love this city. Someone said, I bleed blue. I bleed Richardson blue. And I can't imagine raising my family anywhere else. I can't imagine having my main business anywhere else. And I'm here for the duration. Thank you.
Many thanks to both of you for participating in our virtual forum. Early voting in person begins Monday, April 19th, and continues through Tuesday, April 27th. You must have already registered in order to vote in the May 1st joint election. The deadline was April 1st. Make sure you exercise your right to vote, and thank you for watching.